And they expect to recognize a one-time gain of $2.6 billion. So it's not entirely a matter of civic duty.
And so will people now conclude it's good to have huge, too-big-to-fail banks around to help when the going gets tough?
Yeah, I mean, J.P. Morgan Chase is now too big to be too big to fail. And, you know, it runs against current government policy. Current administration doesn't like big. They're going after big. They say, you know, these institutions already are too big. In fact, this deal makes J.P. Morgan so big that it needs approval from the OCC, the Officer of the Comptroller of the Currency, to even go through.
Now, we're talking about bank regulation. We heard from both the Federal Reserve and the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation last week criticizing themselves for not doing enough to supervise the two other banks that failed 7 weeks ago. Here we are again, right? So they're going to beef that up?
They need to make some changes. I mean, it seems to be systemic. The regulators, the people that we rely on to oversee these banks, don't seem to see very much.
Let's talk about causes for a second here. First Republic customers with texts and headlines on their smartphones started saying, I'm pulling out my money. What about you? And so all these deposits fled. But also something else, right? First Republic was also on the wrong side of one of the great challenges of our time, right? Interest rates are rising, and what should have been safe holdings of government bonds weren't so safe if you need the money in a hurry.
First Republic not only had safe government bonds, but it had a lot of really jumbo real estate loans. Because remember, its clients tend to be really wealthy people. So they have these big real estate loans, and the bank made a fatal choice. Instead of making the loans and reselling them to other investors, like most banks do, First Republic held on to those loans, and just like the government securities, their value plummeted.
Now, Eric, if we step back from this story a bit, banks are supposed to be solid, safe, granite-like protectors of our money. I mean, they have big columns out front that look very safe. How do we let them get risky like this?
You know, we've let banks go from being those safe bedrock institutions to being sort of speculators. They're sort of speculating on interest rates. They're using a lot of leverage. They're really maximizing profits, not safety. And you wonder whether they have wandered from their essential purpose and need to be reined in some way.
Always good to talk to Eric Gordon. He's a professor at the University of Michigan's Ross School of Business. Thank you very much.
My pleasure, David.
IC Dow futures are up slightly, 20 points now, with the Federal Reserve likely to raise interest rates again this week.
Marketplace Morning Report is supported by Baird, dedicated to attracting and retaining talent from across the financial industry, providing stability and continuity for client relationships. More information at BairdDifference.com. And by Amazon Business, helping provide a smarter, easier way to get the supplies businesses need to thrive. Amazon Business, your partner for smart business buying.
We have new data later today on construction spending. Higher interest rates might drag these numbers down. We'll see. And builders are still having trouble finding the workers they need. Marketplace's Elizabeth Troval reports.
If you ask non-residential builders about the industry's major stressors, workforce shortages tops the list.
Most of our members will tell you they got more work than they can actually build, largely because they don't have enough people to do the work.
That's Brian Termeo with Associated General Contractors of America. He says shortages are most acute in boots and a hard hat jobs like
roofers, concrete masons, stone masons, pipe fitters.
All while the government invests in infrastructure and manufacturing projects that will cost taxpayers more to build, says Anirban Basu, CEO of Sage Policy Group consulting firm.
We don't have enough workers to do any of this. And so what we're doing is very expensive to accomplish.
He says one way to widen the pool of payrolled construction workers is immigration reform, so companies can train up the undocumented people working in construction without skirting the law. Stan Merrick of Merrick Construction agrees.
We would take probably in Texas half of the undocumented workers out of the shadows, put them on jobs where they pay payroll taxes, receive training, safety, workman's comp, and elevate the lives of those workers.
Of course, for Congress, immigration reform is a tall order. I'm Elizabeth Troval per marketplace.
And back to our top story, the collapse of First Republic Bank, with all deposits now available at Chase banks today. JP Morgan Chase stock is up 4.3% pre-market. First Republic stock is at $2.30 in pre-market trading now, down from $146 earlier this year. It's hard to understand what assets would underlie these. There's a term for this, cigar butt investing, like distasteful little things you might retrieve from a sidewalk for a real walk on the wild side. In New York, I'm David Brancaccio with the Marketplace Morning Report. 8 p.m., American Public Media.
I'm Scott Tong. A new documentary short film details how some of the most
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. The May 1st, 2023, 9 a.m. session of Roanoke City Council is hereby called to order, and I'll ask our clerk, Ms. Susan McCord, to please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Cobb.
Here.
Ms. White Boyd. Here. Mr. Volleson.
Here.
Ms. Moon Reynolds?
Here.
Ms. Sanchez Jones?
Here.
Mr. Pretty?
Here.
And Mayor Lee.
Here, and a quorum is present. Council meetings will be televised live and replayed on RVTV Channel 3 on Thursdays at 7 o'clock p.m. and Saturdays from 10 a.m. to 5 o'clock p.m. and video stream through Facebook Live at facebook.com/Roanoke VA. Council meetings are offered with closed captioning for the deaf and or hard of hearing. All right, this morning we have a full agenda today, and so we want to move as expeditiously as we can through the business that we have. And then please note that Councilman Purdy and I will go to the circuit court for a law day in our city at 12 noon. Then come back, and I anticipate us gathering with council at that time. All right. Items for action this morning are, we have a communication from the mayor's office requesting that council convene in a closed meeting to discuss vacancies on certain authorities, boards, commissions, and committees appointed by council pursuant to Section 2.2-3711 Code of Virginia as amended. And a list of the current vacancies is included with the agenda for this meeting, and that's for council. There's another communication from the mayor's office requesting that council convene in a closed meeting to discuss the appointment of 2 trustees to serve on the Roanoke City School Board for 3-year terms, each commencing July 1st, 2023 and ending June 30th, 20.
We need to do motions for each of those.
one individually
Okay.
for a vote.
All right. I need a motion for the first closed meeting.
So moved. Second.
All right. Madam Clerk, can you call the roll?
Yes. Vice Mayor Cobb?
Aye.
Ms. White Boyd? Aye. Mr. Volleson?
Aye.
Ms. Moon Reynolds?
Aye.
Ms. Sanchez Jones?
Aye.
Mr. Pretty?
Aye.
And Mayor Lee.
Aye. And that communication is approved. That gives you an example of how I want to move through this agenda today as we go through it. All right, a communication from the mayor's office requesting that council convene in a closed meeting to discuss the appointment of 2 trustees to serve on the Roanoke City School Board for 3-year terms, each commencing July 1st, 2023 and ending June 30th, 2026. It's a long time. And pursuant to Section 2.2, 3711 Code of Virginia as amended. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
All right. Madam Clerk, can you please call the roll?
Vice Mayor Cobb?
Aye.
Ms. White Boyd?
Aye.
Mr. Volleson?
Aye.
Ms. Moon Reynolds?
Aye.
Ms. Sanchez Jones? Mr. Pretty?
Aye.
And Mayor Lee.
Aye. Thank you. And a communication from Council Member Patricia White Boyd, Chair of the City Council Personnel Committee, requesting that council convene in a closed meeting to discuss a personnel matter being the performance of a council-appointed officer pursuant to Section 2.2-3711 Code of Virginia as amended. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All right. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Cobb?
Aye.
Ms. White Boyd?
Aye.
Mr. Volleson?
Aye.
Ms. Moon Reynolds?
Aye.
Ms. Sanchez Jones? Mr. Pretty?
Aye.
Mayor Lee.
Aye. Thank you. All right, we're pleased to recognize this morning the 5th grade leadership team from Highland Park Elementary School in attendance. There are 13 students, and their teacher, Jenny Roy, and Principal Kelly Romney will be in attendance. And we want to welcome the team and pass out some city logo water bottles. And I saw them in the back, and they'll be passed out to the students. All right, let's join and give the students and Highland Park School a hand for being welcome, everybody, welcome. And Vice Mayor, you have any remarks you want to make today?
Well, we're really happy that you're here. Both of our kids went to Highland Park Elementary School, so they are Hawk alumni, and I had the honor of serving as PTA president there for a couple of years, and it's a great school, and we're very proud of all of you for being leaders and for taking the time to be with us today and work with us together. So welcome.
All right. Any other council members have any comments? All right. Thank you all again for being here. I hope you enjoy some of this business we're going to be going over. Are there any topics for discussion by the mayor or members of council? We have some briefings scheduled today, and this will be the order. We'll begin with our legislative meeting chaired by Mr. Priddy. Following that, we will be meeting with our Gun Violence Prevention Commission, and following that, we will begin our budget discussions. So we'll go in that order. All right? Thank you. All right, now I'm going to call on a chairman of our legislative committee, Mr. Priddy.
Officially recess. I'd like to invite the two school board members, the trustees, to take any of the empty seats near a microphone that they feel available today, since we have this set up before we start the meeting. All right, it is, wait for our secretary to be prepared. It is 9:10 a.m. I will call this meeting to order and ask the secretary to call the roll.
Mayor Lee,
Here.
Mr. Cobb,
Here.
Mr. Priddy,
Here.
Ms. Moon Reynolds,
Here.
Ms. Sanchez Jones,
Here.
Mr. Vollison,
Here.
Ms. White Boyd,
Here.
Dr. Jamison,
Here.
Mr. Kathy.
Here.
And there is a quorum. We'll start with the opening remarks today. I'm going to be very quick. It's been requested by a few council members because we have a few other meetings today. Last month, we had the opportunity to go through the relative successes of our legislative agenda as related to council generally in this committee, but we held off on all of the education requests because we scheduled it last minute when school was on spring break. So my regrets for that part. But today we will go over the education requests that were submitted and where they have gone through in the General Assembly. Before we move into public comments, I just wanted to note for this upcoming year, the directors of departments will be requested to submit their request to the city attorney by June 23rd at 4 p.m. And this year, we will also be sending that request to citizen advisory boards. All requests will end up coming before this legislative committee to take action on whether or not they think that it should be referred elsewhere or it should be considered for further development in our legislative agenda going forward. That, of course, excludes anything that two members of any two members of the legislative committee can have something added to the agenda at any point in time prior to a meeting beginning. This is just to help us see what all the requests are and narrow those down before we move forward. And one other final note on last month, there were two items, Senate Bill 1326 and Senate Bill 956, as it related to transit and business improvement districts. We did not end up with any kind of recommendation back from those entities, so we did not take any stance on those, although I believe I can report that both of those amendments were accepted by the General Assembly and have been signed by the governor. So with that, we'll move into public comments. This is something new, or it may have been done in the past for this committee, just giving members of the public an opportunity to sign up to speak on any item that is before our agenda. It will follow the same council meeting guidelines that we have for our regular meetings. People can also just show up generally during a regular council meeting and make a comment, be referred to the city manager, and then that might come before us at some point in the future. There is a difference, though, with the full council. Typically, you sign up with the clerk. You can use a form online, but because this is a legislative committee, you're requested to sign up with the secretary. Oh, we do have a member today. Either by email or by phone, some point beforehand. So I'll start with, the Legislative Committee sets this time aside as a priority for citizens to be heard and invites and encourages citizens to address the committee. Citizens who wish to address the committee are requested to complete a request to speak form provided by the Legislative Committee Secretary prior to the start of the meeting by either calling 540-853-2432 or by emailing Leisha Cook at roanokeVA.gov no later than 5 p.m. on Friday before the meeting, and shall conform to such guidelines for speakers as generally promulgated from time to time. I'll ask the Secretary at this time, do we have anyone signed up from the public to speak?
No.
No one signed up today. Okay. We'll also have a form out front, but you are requested to sign up with that prior to the meeting starting. And if not, you can sign up for next month. We will move into the minutes. Has everyone had an opportunity to review the minutes? Are there any additions, deletions, changes? Otherwise, entertain
Excuse
them.
me, Chair.
Yes, ma'am.
Barbara Dirk perhaps maybe wanted to speak. She stood up.
If it pleases the committee, I'll give her an opportunity. However, because you didn't sign up in advance, I'm going to limit to 3 minutes because we're moving very quickly today.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I truly appreciate this. I opened my email early this morning and realized that I went to Highland Park Elementary School. May is Bike Month, and that's what I'm here to talk about today. We have Bike to Work Day, we have Bike to School Day, we have Safe Routes to School, and this is a wonderful legislative opportunity to make Roanoke a healthy city. We have and still need to prioritize our bicycling and walking infrastructure, prioritizing our communities, our village centers, and our community and our commercial areas, so people can get out and form community and get to know each other. We need to change from a car-centric community to a walking and bicycling friendly, love thy neighbor community. So I am going to the CTB meeting on May 16th, and I'm going to ask that the long distance routes, which is Bike Route 76, connect to our urban area. That I'm going to ask that the CTB 2004 Complete Streets Policy be updated, that the bicycle and pedestrian position that has been filled now by VDOT look at updating the bicycle and pedestrian accommodations. That in the last General Assembly, the speed zone for schools was extended from 600 feet to 750 feet. I would ask you to look at also the time of that school zone speeding, because kids are after school, before school, and right now the school speed zone only is for the times that schools are in session. I know that an overall policy would be difficult for schools that are located on major highways, but I think in the urban area that we can definitely suggest you look at that. Thanks for letting me speak today, and happy Bike Month.
Barbara Dirk, happy Bike Month. Move on into the minutes. If there are any additions, deletions, or a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
If the secretary will call the roll.
Mayor Lee,
Aye.
Mr. Cobb,
Aye.
Mr. Pretty,
Aye.
Ms. Moon Reynolds,
Aye.
Ms. Sanchez Jones, Mr. Vollison, Ms. White Boyd,
Aye.
Dr. Jamison,
Aye.
Mr. Cathy.
And the minutes are adopted. We will now move on to the review of the 2023 legislative program. I know on the program I have listed Advantage Strategies. However, RCPS has made a wonderful investment in hiring Dr. Alan Siebert to do government relations for them, and I see him often in the General Assembly, and I'd like to invite him up to present on each of the school board items. I will mention each item. Alan will go through what occurred with that, whether or not something was introduced, passed, failed, and then ask Kathy Bircher if she has any additional input, any comments from members of the committee before we move on to the next one. We'll try to move rather quickly, but thank you for being here today, Alan.
Indeed, thank you. Chair Priddy, Mayor Lee, members, council. I appreciate the opportunity. And I will summarize and then invite you to stop me and go back and go deeper on anything that you would like to talk about. As you already know, this was a fascinating session. One of the interesting things is that we began the session with hundreds of K-12 bills, and by the time we got to crossover, we were focusing on about 9, because there's a good and a bad of a divided legislature. The good is if there's a bill you don't like, you have a pretty good chance of killing it. The bad is if you have some good ideas, you have a hard time getting them forward. So really, things whittled down very, very quickly between the convening of the session. House Ed Committee even noticed that they had more bills in the short session than they had the prior year in the long session. So it was a very, very busy education slice of time. Obviously, a big part of what we looked at and are still following is the state budget. So in the little chart that we provide to you where we keep up with those 9 bills after crossover, a couple of them still unresolved because a couple of them looking at full repeal of the support staff cap. Repeal of the support staff cap is hugely important for localities because that would mean that funds, programs, services that you have been funding since the Great Recession at wholly local expense, the state would again be recognizing those as services essential for children. And so freeing that up would be very helpful because it would free up some local dollars to help do the local match for the raise. So that was one big part of the budget. The other big part of the budget is we're just waiting and holding our breath for teacher compensation. And so there was some encouraging movement in both the House and Senate budgets, but the skinny budget did not realize either of those. And so we are waiting patiently. And of course, that really complicates the budget work with you as our governing body with the great work of our school board. Looking at the specific areas, our overarching priority is always local control. And this local control priority allows us to speak to a lot of bills that we can't anticipate. We adopt these positions and then hundreds of bills come in, you don't know what they all are. So we're able to evaluate them for, do they support the local control of Roanoke City and Roanoke City School Board, or would they undermine that? So that is one big area that we always look at. School safety and security this year, we kind of split the record. We were really happy to work with some other delegations in other parts of the Commonwealth to look at swatting. The idea of swatting, of mustering law enforcement to make an emergency response presence is not just wholly disruptive for that day. It is traumatizing for that building for foreseeable future. And so we work closely with the delegation, including folks in Arlington, to try to move that forward. And we were pleased to see a little bit of bipartisan support of some anti-swatting legislation. Because again, the days of calling 911 are kind of over. You can initiate something terrible like this a whole host of ways electronically, because obviously if you call the school directly, then you initiate a response. It's very, very problematic. So school safety and security swatting was successful. Our efforts to improve weapon storage was not. We are of the opinion that securing a weapon is profoundly important if you have young children in the house. And so we worked to help advance that legislation, worked with Senator Boysko's office and made testimony on behalf of that, provided comment, and unfortunately that did not make it out of committee. We focused strongly on employee compensation, and we thought the 7% raise for teachers in both budgets was a win. But again, as you all know from your own work, the skinny budget has dialed that back, and we're waiting to see. Another win that we did have, though, was the idea of teacher shortage. Now, I say win, it doesn't mean it solves the teacher shortage. Teacher shortage is complex. You have like the sink of qualified teachers. You need to both add teachers to it, and you just need to stop the leaks. So this was just one idea that we had in terms of trying to add a little bit to the pool. In the Virginia retirement system currently, if you retire, you have to have a 12-month separation of service before you can come back and not lose your retirement benefits. The problem with that 12-month issue is it means 12 months of zero service. And we're very fortunate that many of our strongest teachers and bus drivers retire, take their 1-month separation to be able to do substitute work. But every day they substitute on a bus or in a classroom, they're resetting that 12-month clock. So we were asking VRS to dial that back. We wanted to go back to 1 month so it would match any employment piece. Didn't get there, but got to 6 months. So we've cut it in half, but it's still 6 months that a high-quality substitute who's retired would have to sit out and not do any service. And really, the ones we want back are the people who stay engaged. So we're going to continue to work on that next year, but we were very pleased with that piece. Workforce development, we were really excited and getting lots of feedback. We put in a couple of budget amendments, and we were really pleased that those were put forward by Senator Edwards and Delegate Rasool. and had really good conversations on the House side about some budget amendments. And the goal here was, as we are doubling in the Roanoke City Public Schools career technical education capacity, already budgeted for the facilities, budgeted for the staff, there's a lot of equipment involved. So we work closely with Morgan Romeo and that group to make the case for, hey, how about a one-time appropriation to help us with some equipment? And those conversations were going very, very well until I think a lot of conversations of budget amendments were going well until it was discovered that there was a calculation error in the Department of Education. There was a risk that we were going to not see money that was budgeted in the current year. And so really it was one of the bipartisan things that happened in a hurry in the legislature was the administration and both chambers, both parties worked very quickly to do a hold harmless for the current year we're in. Well, once that did, that took a lot of air out of the room for budget conversations. So we were very thankful to be held harmless, but that was just hours before House and Senate budgets were supposed to be released. And at that point, conversation on a whole host of budget amendments kind of dried up. But we're still making good progress on our CTE programs, but we were a little disappointed about that piece. I shared the complete elimination of support staff cap. That really depends on whether the Senate budget or the House budget holds sway. We certainly hope that that happens. We continue to work on the idea of assessment modernization. Virginia's standards of learning tests really go back to the 1990s. Over time, they've been moved to computers. Some of the items have been enhanced, but it still really is a once-a-year draw a quart of blood out of the child, see how they did. And we're advocating for more thoughtful kind of like let's check, let's do little finger pricks along the way and get data that we can aggregate up and see how our children are doing over time. And so there was in the 2022 General Assembly session a bill called 585 that set up a task force. That task force did not meet after the 22 General Assembly session. It has started meeting, and thankfully Roanoke City Public Schools is represented on that. So we look forward to hopefully some ideas coming there. But then we also had, we always are looking carefully in ideas on how can we improve outcomes for all our children, including our English learner students. And so one of the things we had observed, and this was a kudos to the city and the folks involved in EL, that we have robust apprenticeship programs, great opportunities for young people to go work in workplaces and embark on careers. But there are some challenges there for some of our English learner students in those opportunities. As schools, we can't ask for immigration status. That's appropriate, we shouldn't. But then when you take children out to meet with apprenticeships with businesses, this is something they need to know. This is becoming a little bit of a hurdle as we're ramping up our career technical education opportunities. So the idea of this workforce, which is conceived by folks, Corey Alder and others in our program, is, hey, let's have Roanoke City, Harrisonburg City, some other localities with a large number of EL students. Let's have them who also have apprenticeship programs. Let's create a work group, come together, brainstorm ideas, and maybe generate some ideas for a future General Assembly session. So that bill passed both chambers and was signed into law. So we were excited about that piece. So that's a macro level overview. I certainly want to invite Mr. Cathy and Dr. Jamison, who have been very, very involved in this process, to elaborate and, of course, answer questions that you may have.
Dr. Jamison, with Mr. Cathy, is there anything that you'd like to add?
I don't have anything to add. We're just so fortunate to have Alan with his background as a superintendent and the deep knowledge that he has of our structures, the legislative structures of the people. And, we have, it's really increased our ability to do good for the district, and we're just delighted to have him and delighted to have him here at this meeting, somebody so much more knowledgeable than we are, and we're just glad to have his guidance.
Yeah, I agree with Mr. Cathy, and we're very well informed along the way, so we may not even recognize what questions you might have because we've been talking about this for months.
Wonderful. Kathy Burchard, do you have anything to add when it relates to the education components of this legislative agenda?
Good morning. Chair Preddy, members of the council, and Dr. Siebert as well. As everyone says, Alan does a great job on the ground tracking all of this. I was able to help support, as he said, hundreds of bills. One thing I did want to mention, and kudos to both Roanoke City Public Schools and the Roanoke City Council, you all are really leading the way when it comes to gun safety and the link between those storage bills in particular and the students, keeping students safe. Absolutely, the bill didn't move forward. Just Roanoke City Public Schools was certainly out front on that. So kudos to you all for that, along with the swatting bills, which school divisions across the Commonwealth will benefit from, and talked a whole lot about but Roanoke City Public Schools was really the one standing up saying why it was important. So just wanted to say those two things. Just to reinforce for the City Council the impact of a lack of full state budget, the impact it will have. Obviously, the Code of Virginia has requirements for when budgets need to be submitted to the City Council. We are continuing to hear there will be no further discussion. They may still be talking, not a lot, but we're not going to see anything until after the primaries in June. There is even some talk that it will be fall. And so when you hear Dr. Siebert talk about particularly the potential for up to 2% additional salary increases for staff at schools, that's a big impact from the local share. There's also a bonus implication. The House included a bonus, so how all that works out is going to be incredibly important. The one other thing that I will mention is that the two bills on the Literacy Act that expand it through 8th grade, Delegate Pointer had one bill, Senator Lucas had another. They actually passed with different staffing ratios. First one signed wins. We haven't seen who that is yet. That will have an implication not this upcoming fiscal year, but beyond. So seeing which one was signed first and what that looks like in the budget is going to be important because the staffing levels of reading specialists in 6 through 8 are very different. And again, local implication and the cost associated. So just wanted to mention those few things. The budget implication is going to be just something that we'll have to track, and we will keep you updated as we hear anything. But right now, it looks like July at best, and we're even hearing the fall.
Thank you so much, Kathy. Do the members of the committee have any questions for either Dr. Siebert, Kathy, anyone present? Vice Mayor Cobb.
Thank you. Alan, this is just kind of a funny aside, I think, but when you were talking about drawing blood from children and finger pricks, our student leaders went, what is that all about? And I'm guessing that was a metaphor, but maybe it wasn't.
It was a metaphor for SOL tests in the Commonwealth of Virginia.
Okay. Did y'all hear that? It wasn't actual blood drawing, okay?
Instead of once a year, a whole lot of tests, having the smaller ones you take along the way can add up.
Yeah, does that sound good? Yeah. All right. Based on what you're hearing and bills that maybe didn't come out of committee, do you have kind of a horizon look on what you're hoping will be reintroduced next year as part of our agenda?
There's going to be, and I'm sure Kathy is more poised to speak to this, we're expecting several things. One, regardless of who holds a majority in either chamber next year, we're losing a ton of experience and expertise from both chambers, both sides of the aisle, and it's going to be a very young legislature. And so we're going to see significant changes in seniority, significant changes in who's chairing committees, and a lot of that will not be known until after November. Now, as you know, the board has established a legislative advocacy calendar, and so we kind of tap the drum of advocacy, build relationships year-round, and so we will be building relationships with candidates and the whole 9 yards. But really, a lot is going to depend on just how it shapes up. So I think there'll be the relationship building before the November election, and then, man, it's going to be hair on fire from there to the start of the session to figure out who's on first. And so it's going to be a lot of change. I think on one hand it's unnerving because you're not sure who, what, where, and how. On the other hand, it's kind of like emptying the closet out and putting it all back together. You get to build new relationships and hopefully organize some things in an important way. So we see a challenge there. We always try to reframe that as an opportunity.
Thank you. I'll note that they're changing office buildings too, and that's just going to add to the chaos of it. Any other members of the committee, comments, questions?
I would just, if
Yes.
my chair is, I would just echo Ms. Bircher's comments. Thank you for throwing it out there. As we go over our budget each month, I know that Ms. Jackson is showing us radically different versions of what we might need to plan for next year. And with new experience in the legislature, it wouldn't surprise me if we're not facing very tenuous budget situations for the coming years. So I am quite, we're very concerned about the big distance between those different budget proposals coming out.
Thank you. Alan, I do have a question about the request. I think it was the first or second one on the agenda about the BBs and pellet guns. But did anyone end up putting any legislation towards that end?
We did not find patrons for those positions.
Okay. I think this may have come up at one council meeting before, and this is really something more for council to consider. But when I was reviewing the code, I believe it's called something, pneumatic guns is how we regulate them under our local authority. And currently, our penalty is one class less than what we're able to do. I know that this legislation sought to bring it even further by reclassifying it to be considered the same as a full weapon, even if it's just a BB or pellet gun. So I hope at some point council will consider action on that front, where if we're requesting for some higher threshold across the board, that we take the highest action that we can at the local level. With that, if there are no more, yes, Councilman Volson.
Sorry, just one quick comment. First, I wanted to thank the city staff, or the school board and the city staff, for making us such a leader on gun storage and gun violence, gun possession. And I think that's a great thing that you guys are pushing forward on. We're talking about that later today, and that's a great step for the city, so thank you. And also the SOLs. Luke, I know you and I were the ones that we were in school when this happened, when we changed over to SOLs, and I can remember the change in the way that teachers started to teach. And my mom was a teacher, and so I saw how that really affected what happened in the classroom. It was no longer more of a creative learning. It was more, here are your SOLs, write them down for the day, you're going to learn these things. So I hope that when we're looking at that issue and how we're doing the testing, that's brought into it as well, is what creativity can the teacher bring in there?
Indeed, I would simply share that in another volunteer role that I wear, we were able to remove language from the proposed history standards that would have really kind of put the squeeze on teacher autonomy. It also would have really limited local control in terms of the course sequence you use. And so those were really important outcomes of that work, that we were able to preserve those pieces as well. But yes, standards themselves are important, and we need to have standards. But how, what I think you're touching on there, council member, is how. The how is often more important than the what. And when that how, it comes down to 40, 45, or 50 test items, it creates an inherent narrowing of the curriculum, which is unfortunate.
Yeah. Thank you.
And thank you. If there are no other comments, we'll move on to the last item in the review. Kathy, just to know if there's anything that you might want to add when it comes to reconvene session, bill and budget update. You touched on it briefly before. If there are just any other final notes before we move on.
No, actually, again, we forwarded a couple of items. I'm happy to resend both our presentation on the reconvene session, the bill list, but also VML's review of the bills that were important to local governments, incredibly important. Happy to resend those along. Again, for you all, the big thing is budget, and the fact that we are continuing to hear that this is not a process that's going to come to a quick close. And so earliest we hear again is primary day, June 20th. Which would put, again, they will have to reconvene, and the governor will have to call them back. So this isn't, we have a budget, hooray, here you go, city council. There'll be a process associated. So having a fiscal 24 budget before the beginning of fiscal 24 is looking unlikely. And again, what's built into that, and we are hearing, there's this real divide over tax policy, the governor and the House adopting one side and the Senate adopting another. How that all plays out will really make decisions around how much funding comes to the local government, but also what requirements may be in place for a local match or the local share required for their staffing or salaries, and some decisions that will have to be made. So it puts local governments in a really precarious situation. We have continued to beat that drum with members of the legislature. And I did want to reinforce to Dr. Siebert's point about change. The chairman of the House Education Committee, Delegate Glenn Davis, actually has resigned from the House. He has taken a position in the Youngkin administration to head the Energy Department. And so, as a key leader on that K-12 committee, now granted, the chairman of the House Appropriation works behind the scenes with staff pretty closely, and then brings his committee in a little bit behind that work, but still an important voice that's no longer on that committee. So long way of saying not much more to report, but we continue to reinforce how challenging this becomes for local governments and for local school divisions.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from members of the committee? Okay, thank you, Kathy. We will move on to other business. I'm not asking for any action from the legislative committee on this matter, but the final item on here is the update to City Code Section 2-304A, the legislative committee, as it relates to I believe currently the city clerk is tasked with recording the minutes and being secretary of the committee, although that's not been the practice for some time. And so the city attorney had come up with a draft that addressed both personnel committee and the legislative committee. I removed the personnel committee out just for discussion here to see if there are any thoughts. I wanted to make sure that our trustees had an opportunity to provide any input since they're not on council fully before this comes before them. And I just do have a request. Is the current city clerk fine with the updates as they're presented? Okay. That opinion might be the most important. Any thoughts from any members of the committee?
I think you just asked the most important first.
Just wanted to make sure. All right.
And Mr. Chair?
Yes.
We will then, with that, bring this back to council at the next council meeting for consideration by council to adopt these amendments.
So we'll have something introduced today, but it won't be adopted until 2 weeks from today.
Is when it'll be formally introduced and adopted by, or considered by council.
Formally considered by council. All right. Are there any other business items that anyone wishes to address or speak on before we adjourn? Okay, we will adjourn. It is 9:39. I'd like to note that that was only 29 minutes.
That is good. That's good timing. Sure. Thank you.
Take a brief recess to let the commissioners come up.
Okay, yeah. All right, we're going to recess shortly and let the Gun Violence Commission members come up. You have your name on each card.
That's a good change.
Yeah, it wasn't the one they posted, that's all. But they realized, they were like, no, he was there. I know, I feel like I've got to take it.
Okay. Where's Joe?
I went to the restroom.
All right, we're ready to meet with Gun Violence Commission, and I'll wait on Ms. Cobbs, Vice Mayor Cobb, to lead us in the discussion. But welcome, and let's see. All right, is there roll call here for?
It's a roll call, but we're waiting on Joe, I believe, and Ms. Moon.
All right, we're gonna, Vice Mayor, we're gonna, Ms. Reynolds is here, not here from council, so, we'll just let you go ahead and lead the discussion.
Mayor, I think we should call the roll for the council, and then the roll call for the gun violence, I believe Angie's doing, and then we can go on.
Who's doing the gun violence? Roll call?
She's going to do
She
roll
is,
call.
Angie is.
Oh, okay, all right. All right, Madam Clerk, if you call the roll, please, for the council again.
Yes. Vice Mayor Cobb,
Here.
Ms. White Boyd,
Here.
Mr. Vollison,
Here.
Ms. Moon Reynolds, Ms. Sanchez Jones, Mr. Pretty, Mayor Lee.
Here. Quorum is present.
There she is.
All right, Ms. O'Brien?
Ms. Shakira Williams is absent. Ms. Decca Knight, absent. Ms. Stacy Shepard. Here. Dr. Eric Anderson. Mr. Elliot Major.
Here.
Reverend Tim Harvey.
Here.
Ms. Nicole Ross.
Here.
Rabbi Kathy Cohen.
Here.
Vice Mayor Cobb.
Here. Thank you, Andy. Well, I want to thank council for this opportunity to meet collaboratively with the Gun Violence Prevention Commission. This is a secondary step to the Violence Prevention Framework workshop that the city manager put together, where we reviewed our prevention, intervention, response, enforcement, and justice strategy and plan. During that workshop, we presented initially our strategic recommendations, and so we wanted to take this opportunity today to just dive into those a little more deeply, raise questions, have conversation, and provide some direction for the commission and the council as we move forward collaboratively. I want to express my gratitude to all of the commissioners. Every one of you are very dedicated to this work and share the same desire as council to see a reduction in our incidents of gun violence, but also understanding that in addition to the short-term work, there's a lot of long-time relationship-building work that has to take place. And we're starting to see some of the fruits of that even while we're seeing the increasing challenges in the community and across the nation. I do want to, all three of the folks who couldn't be here today simply could not get out of their work obligations today, and all of us are full-time. So thank you who were able to be here today, and we appreciate those not able to be here. But I know that they will check out the live stream later. So I think everyone has in front of you three documents. One is the strategic recommendations document, and if you turn to page 14 of that, we'll just go through each of the recommendations. And then supplementally to that, there are two policy documents. One is titled Policy for Boards and Commissions Appointed by City Council. And the second is an ordinance. It's a recommended revision to an ordinance. And we will take a look at those as we go through these recommendations today. So again, this is a collaborative conversation. As we go through these, I'll try and point out places where we're asking for wisdom and direction from council, where we are hopeful for collaboration, and your advice on how to move forward with some of these things. As the mayor has said, council wants to be more integrally involved in this work, and I think this is a great step to get us there. Recommendation one is to continue the research process of gathering and reviewing evidence-based data related to the root causes of gun violence. We have, from the beginning, focused our work on the root causes because we know unless those are addressed, the systemic problems will not be changed. Within this, we are hoping to continue to identify and fund a research partner. We understand that Roanoke City Public Schools has a very good working relationship with Virginia Tech's research department, and one of the avenues we've looked at is how we can partner with the schools to tap into that research component. There may be some other options for us to do that, but particularly as we look at the intersection with public health, and this is a public health epidemic, we want to expand that as much as possible. And that just undergirds the long-term work that we're doing. We will be implementing a second community needs assessment that will be taking place this fall. We've identified a partner for that. Once all of that's confirmed, we'll be able to share that information. And you know, a lot has changed in the community, even since the fall of '21 when we did this initial assessment. And I think it will be interesting to see what the impact has been, particularly in the lives of youth. Nicole, I was in a meeting recently with Joe Nelson at TAP, and we were talking about This Valley Works and some of the conversations with youth. And she just noted that we're starting to hear some things from youth differently than we did even a couple of years ago about some of their concerns. I don't know if you have information about that or anything you'd like to share with that.
From Joe, I wasn't a part of that particular meeting, but just from the young people that I personally have worked with, you know, they're paying a little bit more attention than typically they were a couple of years ago. They're watching the news, they're seeing the impact, and they are feeling it a little bit differently.
Yeah, thank you. We want to continue to expand our collaborative work with government, media, and marketing partners to share information widely. This afternoon, we'll be hearing a presentation about a potential public awareness campaign from Engage Strategies and 5 Points Creative that we've been working with. I think you'll find it very informative. But just to give you, as we think about messaging, our police department does a really good job of posting in a timely way when there has been an incident. One of the things we may want to consider is, as part of that, anything that goes out through our city media, that we connect with that resources. So if there has been a traumatic event, that at the base of that or within the body of that information, we message out, if you are in need of trauma support or mental health support, here is a way to connect with that, so that we're not just providing the data about and the facts about the incident, but how people can get help. This last thing is where we could use some help from you under this first recommendation. City Council to define frequency and detail of the commission reporting. Currently in our ordinance, we're asked to give one report annually, which is typical of any boards or agencies that report to council. I think because of the magnitude of this work, we've all agreed that more regular reporting is helpful. I think we acknowledge that we have been reporting on a monthly basis, some aspects of the work as part of the Violence Prevention Framework monthly updates. But it would be helpful to hear from council how often would be useful, and that might be a conversation in collaboration with the city manager and city staff. But I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on that at this point.
Well, were you ready with this question?
I was thinking once a quarter, because that gives, I think that gives enough time for if something is alarming, if something is alarming at one meeting, that gives time to see a trend change, hopefully in the next meeting, so that we can start to see, it's a better time period, I think, for data points, if you will. And I think that's something that we really need to use to help us get through this, is using as much data as we can, but not overdoing it.
Well, one of the things I want to address this morning is what goes into the commission deciding who's granted what program, what organization. Because I think I want council, and we've talked about this, to be more involved in that decision-making process. And also when a recommendation made that comes to us, that we have a chance to review it and discuss it. And I know that may slow the process down a little, but that's something that I think the council needs to be involved in, because we're held responsible for decisions that are made. So I think that's important.
That's a good segue. Unless somebody else has something on the frequency.
I do just have something on the frequency point. This is for members of council and just broadly members of the public to, where I think quarterly reporting would be important for maybe more detailed reports overall. But when it comes to any board or commission, anyone has opportunity to request that they be added to the email list so that they get every agenda and they get every minutes. And that comes for every board and commission that we have under the city. And that will just give you an idea of what's coming up ahead of time, what action has been taken before, and then have an opportunity to be present. But as it comes to this council, I think quarterly would be good for receiving reports.
Can I just say, I would certainly concur with my colleagues, but I would say that if it's something that we need to address sooner, perhaps just a special update of any special occurrences, kind of like what you've done in the past.
Yeah, I think that's important too,
Yeah.
because there are things that come up.
But,
that
exactly.
Can't wait for
Yeah,
quarterly.
but basically I do concur with my colleagues.
Well, to build on what the mayor just talked about, it's recommendation 2, and that's to codify a framework for the city of Roanoke's gun violence funding support of prevention, intervention, and response efforts. The first item is to clarify policies and procedures for awarding and distributing funds and confirm consistencies in policies and procedures in all city-appointed authorities, boards, and commissions. So the 2 other documents that you have would be good for you to take out and take a look at now. Laura Carini, who's with the city attorney's office, has prepared these documents. And this not only sets forward a funding process and a review process, but it aligns it with other boards and agencies that also report funding back to the city. I will note that typically that happens with general fund dollars. In some cases, it happens with grant dollars, but not as often as general fund dollars. So just keep that in mind. But the first one is the policy for boards and commissions appointed by city council for distributing grant funds in a competitive and transparent manner. And I'm not going to read all of this. This is just to present to you all today for review. And it could be perhaps at the May 15th meeting, it could be brought forward for adoption. Do you have a, yeah.
I got it, I think.
But basically, the components of this include the purpose, the eligibility, application process, review process, award process, reporting requirements, and then recommendations to council. So once that process is thoroughly completed, then those recommendations come to council for affirmation and confirmation.
So Ms. Vice Mayor, so these, the eligibility requirements are applicable to all of the boards and commissions? You're saying this is our generic policy?
Yeah, this aligns it with,
Okay.
with all. And that's my understanding. Is that correct, Tim?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. That was something we felt was equitable and important for us to do, so that if this came up with other boards or commissions, we would have clarity about it.
So the religious organization does not have to be a 501c3, it says
Correct.
or, okay.
Again, this is for initial review today, but will likely come to us for consideration at the May 15th meeting. The second one is to...
Excuse me, Mr. Chair. I just want to be clear, based on what the attorney's saying, this is the same policy, or, as you said, Tim, with regards to what the Arts Commission does? Am I clear?
Yes.
Okay, just want to make sure I was hearing you right. Okay.
The one difference that you might see is, and I think that Chairperson Cobb referred to this is the large number of grant funds that have been received by this commission. That, for example, the Arts Commission hasn't received. I think that is one of the things that we've seen. But for their efforts, a large number of grant funds that have been received would not have been received.
I'm sorry, say that again.
But for the actions of this commission, a large number of grant funds, such as the grant fund received from the Attorney General's office and other grant funds, would not have been realized but for their actions.
Okay.
So that's what's made it unique in that perspective. But this policy tries to bring it more in line with the other, such as the Arts Commission. That's another commission that spends a large number of funds for promoting the arts, and then we'd follow a similar process.
Mr. Pretty?
But I want to make clear, but even in that instance, still, at least what I've seen in the practice, council will adopt to receive and expend those funds themselves, because it is the council's general budget.
Council has adopted and received every grant that has, even if we have written the application for that, council has adopted and received all of those, along with the guidelines for distribution.
And some other questions on the policies. I see where it talks about agencies and 501c3 religious organizations, but I mean, even with the Arts Commission, aren't some of those dollars like contracted for specific projects? They're not necessarily grants to a 501c3. It might be to
That's
an
correct.
organization or entity. So there could still be contracts or other recommendations that aren't under these particular guidelines.
That's correct.
Okay, just want to make sure on that. And then procedurally, I just have a question for the city attorney. If this is a policy, but if and when it ultimately came before council, would that be in the form of a resolution to adopt the policy, which is separate from an ordinance to change our city code on a separate aspect we'll discuss in a moment?
Actually, arguably, the policy would be adopted by the commission. The code change would be what would be adopted by council. Now, if you would like, in order to clarify, since this is such a public issue, to have a resolution also conferring in that policy change, I think that would be appropriate.
Question. Mr. Chair, so basically, I'm just trying to understand, are these already requirements that we have in existing policies for our boards and commissions? So really, there would not be any necessary changes for any ordinances or anything, because we're pretty much following the same guidelines that are already in place. Is that correct?
It is for this policy,
Okay.
but when we get to the ordinance that created the commission, that's where we need to add an amendment that addresses the funding piece of it.
Okay,
That
okay.
didn't exist.
Okay, that makes sense. I was just wondering what we were talking about, changing ordinances and things.
Okay, may I ask a question? Okay. I just want to be clear. On the, following up on what Councilmember Pretty said, and you did answer it, Mr. Chair, with regards to recommendations coming to council, and you said some have come in the past. I just want to be clear, with the council with the commission bringing recommendations before the council, they will come from the commission signed by the chair and not from the manager, as we do with
Yes.
the Arts Commission. When the Arts Commission is a report under the manager, but it's from the Arts Commission, so it's clear that it's coming from the Arts Commission,
Yes.
as well as the Advisory Board of Human Resources, Human Services. And so I just wanted to be clear that going forward, when you all have recommendations for grant funding, and you bring that forth, it's coming from the the Gun Violence Commission, and it will be stated as such. Am I clear?
I would think we could do that. I will say that all of the funding that has come to the city has been in contract with the city and not the commission. All of the grant funding has been in contract with the city.
Right, but when we asked about when was it recommended by the Gun Violence Commission, it has been said yes, but it has come through the manager and not through the commission.
It's come through the manager because the manager signs the contracts.
Correct, but when we ask about the Gun Violence Commission and the work you all are doing with regards to the funding, it's not noted as such that it's coming, because you didn't have the authority, I suppose, when the grant funds
Yeah,
were
we can
being
certainly do
allocated.
that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Would that be the best way to do it, to have it come through the manager?
I don't want to
And I don't mind that, I'm just saying
overcomplicate.
that just putting their name to it as they do under items recommended for action. It does list the Arts Commission when they have funding recommendations, such as for the budget coming up. They will have their recommendation, and so just like the Human Services Department, for the advisory board, they will, when they have funds and they are given allocating money to whether it's agencies or even through the arts culture, they put the recommendation through the manager, but it's from the Arts Commission. That's all I'm saying. It's just being clear on where the money's coming from.
I just want to say, as we keep records on this, and I want to put it in its simplest form, if a recommendation comes from the Gun Violence Commission to fund 10th Street Baptist Church for X amount, is it in the record that council says, okay, we approve that? Is that in the record, or when we vote on it, somebody wants to look at our minutes? Is that in the minutes? Is that, as a record, is that in the minutes?
So there's different pieces. If the policy that's proposed, the change that we're talking about, then that would be the case, just like it is, as was mentioned with the Arts Commission, Human Service Advisory Board, CDBG, go through that list of things. And I want to make sure everybody, and I think everybody knows this, but distinguish between the original application for grant funding. So let's say, for example, there's an original application for grant funding through the Attorney General's office. That grant, if successful, regardless of who applies for it, if successful, comes here to the council. The council accepts that grant and awards or basically appropriates those funds. That's in the record, and that exists currently, regardless of whatever policy. What this change would do is then, just like with the Arts Commission, just like with the Human Service Advisory Board and others, using those grant dollars, if you're going to grant those dollars, if the commission wishes to grant those dollars further through a grant program to other entities, that will now, if approved, come to the commission or to the council, just as those others do, and you would approve or reject those as they come forward. Again, just as you do with the Arts Commission, just as you do with Human Service Advisory Board. So that would be reflected too. To Tim's point, I think, or maybe Mr. Priddy had mentioned it, and I'll use the example of the grant that the Arts Commission secured through the National Endowment for the Arts. So the grant that was secured came here. It was secured, council approved it and appropriated it. In most instances, those dollars were then contracted for with artists, basically, in accordance with those. Those contracts don't come back, obviously, to council. If they did a grant program, a mini grant program, whatever it was, through the Arts Commission, then those would come back. So all of that right now, or parts of that right now, are indeed presented to council and approved by council. This change that's being talked about would ensure consistency with the other boards and commissions that we have and how that's addressed, and then the record that follows that.
Yes.
Okay. But the reason I asked that question, a citizen comes up to me and said, you, me being council, approved 10th Street getting $27,000. Approved that. I want, and I said, well, wait a minute. Did I approve $27,000? This is an example. It's no 10th Street. I'm just saying 10th. Folks get upset. 10th Street Baptist Church. And I'm saying, I approved that?
And today, what the council would have approved is the grant that actually established the funding for that grant. And then under this scenario currently, the Gun Violence Prevention Commission, through a process, selected and awarded that particular grant. This change would flip that to being a recommendation for action by the Gun Violence Prevention Commission coming to the council for action.
So it'd allow another layer of accountability, and it would allow council to say, to ask questions, to say, can you go into more detail about this before confirming it? Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification.
So the second document is the ordinance that established the Gun Violence Prevention Commission, and it's a 3-page document. If you look on page 2, you'll find there the additions which align this with boards and commissions like the Arts Commission and the Human Services Advisory Board. And my understanding, Tim, is that this is consistent with what's in those ordinances. Is that accurate?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. So this addresses the funding piece of it. It's to align the policy with the ordinance amendment. Any questions on that? And again, we'll have opportunity to bring this forward. I do have a procedural question, Tim, that you might be able to answer. Is it advisable for the commission to adopt either of these before it comes to council? Or is it council's prerogative to adopt these and then just instruct the commission that these have been adopted?
The policy should be adopted by the commission prior to the code changes coming forward. Then I think they work together. Plus, then the council is informed that the policy has been put in place, and the code changes then fit well with the policy.
Okay, because our next meeting, I think, is not until the Tuesday after the next council meeting.
And of course, if you have a quorum present of the Gun Violence Prevention Commission today,
We
They
do
could-
have a quorum present, so we could
you
act
could
on this
take it up
today and
and act
recommend
on
it
it
to
today.
council. Is that your preference to do that, Commission? Okay? Yes. All right. Then I'll entertain a motion to adopt the policy document.
So moved.
Is there a second? All right, second by Pastor Harvey. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? And the policy is adopted for recommendation to council.
Mr. Chair, if I may add just one additional information here that I think will also make a change based on this, just to make, goes back to the mayor's question earlier, which is those original grant applications that come in. You know, the majority of grant applications we receive that have a relationship to addressing gun violence are going to come through DCJS and actually are steered toward the police department. So what we'll do is when those council reports come forward, whether that's grants from the Attorney General or DCGS or from somebody else, we'll make it clear in there as to whether the expectation is that those funds will be going forward to the Gun Violence Prevention Commission for consideration, then coming back, or if those funds will be going forward onto the police department or whatever other one. That way it'll be clear at that point. And the significance of that is, in many of those grants that are going to the police department, that's the council's one time to review what's in that grant and how those dollars are anticipated to be spent. Versus the Gun Violence Prevention Commission, some of those may be coming back based on this policy. So we'll make that change also in our council report so that it's clear what the eventual disposition of those dollars will be. So, thank you.
Thank you. The only other thing I think in this recommendation number 2 is, and one thing that would certainly be helpful to us, as council members, we often go to conferences and events, whether virtually or in person. And as we hear about grant opportunities or programs that are effective in other communities that we could utilize here in the city, it would be really helpful to have council share those with the commission so that we can look into activating those collaboratively with council. I know Trish and I were just talking about that from a sustainability conference. You want to say a few words about that?
Yeah, I was really surprised that, attending a sustainability conference, that gun violence prevention came up. And one of the key takeaways was to make sure that we involve our corporate sector, which I'm not sure that we do enough of that, holding them accountable and also asking them to be responsible as well, because it impacts them just as much as it does the city. So I think there's already some conversation that it's time to broach that conversation with our corporate community, and I think it would be beneficial, whether it's funding or changing the narrative, just like we were talking about this morning with the city manager, just sometimes the narrative, talking about the wonderful things that are happening in the city, not just about the gun violence, because there are other things happening aside from that. So I thought that was really good coming from a sustainability conference to have that conversation.
And you'll hear that loud and clear in the public awareness campaign this afternoon.
And may I speak to what you're saying from some of the conference, and Bob knows this, from time to time through National League of Cities. I have shared with him, as well as other outside agencies where there's grant funding available, where the city has to be the fiscal agent, and has encouraged the city manager to work with those agencies to see if we can get those grants. So yes, you're on the right track with that.
Well, and that leads into recommendation number 3.
Vice Mayor,
Yes,
before we move
Mr.
into that, as the ordinance was brought up, I understand that the commission voted on adoption of the policy separately. As it relates to the ordinance, this is a question for, is there any action that we need to take to make sure that the one that is presented today will be on our agenda at our upcoming meeting?
Do we need a motion to do that?
We present it today and then adopt it, I guess, in 2 weeks.
Not a formal motion. I can get guidance from the council members.
Well, I think the commission, we reviewed the initial draft of this at our last meeting, and I think we're in concurrence to recommend this to council for adoption, unless I hear differently from any commissioners, I think. Okay, thank you.
Okay, but I did, if we're going to talk about the ordinance, I do have some questions with regards to it, if I may, in reviewing it. One of the things, because we have not yet heard from the municipal auditor on the audit yet, so we're moving in front of that with the presumption. I do want to ask the question, there had been some conversation and some questions asked, inquiries made about, with regards to one member shall be a member of city council. I am still wanting conversation to be held by the council with regards to that, rather than move and adopt it with that verbiage still in place. So with that said, I think until we have that discussion, I don't think we are in a position yet until, to vote on this until we decide on how we're going to move forward on that. Unless the majority of the council, and it is the consensus, that there be one member of city council to serve on the commission.
I agree. I want to hold off on those things in terms of that until that's why we're looking at the auditor's report, which I hope will come soon. But I don't want to tie us into something right now.
Right.
Because, we contemplate, there may be changes, there may be different, contemplate that. So I think that's a valid point.
So Mayor, is that instruction hold off on this code amendment? Or there might be another code amendment after this?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let this one go. We can always address that other issue later.
Right, I think so.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. That helps me a lot.
Vice Mayor Dunn. I would just concur with that sentiment. That's why I asked specifically about whether or not action to be taken about putting forward this ordinance as it's been presented to be considered for the near future. I understand there is a separate action that relates entirely separate as it may relate to either membership or another item. But as it comes to the distribution of funds and how that's concisely focused on here, I think it'd be appropriate for us to take action sooner so that as the commission's taking action in the near future, even possibly, they have clear guidelines about what to do next.
Well, I think that's helpful. I think one concern we've had is that, some of the, particularly with the ARPA funding, we would have already been in a cycle of opening for solicitations from the community for mini grants for this summer, which we think is critically important, but all of that has been delayed. So if we adopt this, it would, I don't want to make a presumption, it could allow the commission to start that process and then bring those recommendations to council once that's completed. If that's not the desire of council, then, and we don't know when the audit will be completed, it might be June, but it might be after that. So that delays any funding opportunities for organizations locally for the summer, which we anticipate we're going to need a lot more programming or extended programming to be beneficial to help curb some of this violence. So I just want to keep that caveat in mind.
Vice Mayor, just to follow up briefly, that's a precise way to focus on this. I wouldn't want a separate item to halt all of the work of the commission until that other item is considered. And I'd prefer that this be considered by council soon so that work can continue and then separate action can be done in the future.
Mr. Chair, can we take the items separately and amend the ordinance? I guess, accordingly. I know that will require us to come back multiple times, but it seems that it is going to be necessary to do that so that we do not impede the process of the commission as far as summer programs, because we already know that's an issue already, is summer programs, so we certainly would not want to impede that. But it seems like there are going to be multiple items that need to be addressed independently.
Right.
So we can do that.
Yeah.
And he's shaking his head, yes.
Yes.
The city attorney.
That's
Okay.
following the mayor's direction of bringing this particular change forward at the next council meeting.
Okay.
All right. I have a separate question, though, as it relates to the separate consideration that might be considered by council. Will there be a discussion jointly amongst both council and the commission prior to that separate action being considered?
I would hope so.
Or would this be the only opportunity we have before then, depending on when that item is brought up?
In terms of a council representative on the commission?
It could be either or. I mean, there might be some, it might be more productive to have members of council have an opportunity to be heard, or they can take an action jointly together as they have prior in the past.
I would have thought this would have been discussed among our vacancies. When we discuss vacancies, that is, I would think, would be the opportunity to discuss the membership for the Gun Violence Commission.
Well,
It
and I
might
will
fall
say
under that.
that I think the commission has been very clear on their desire to have a council member on the commission.
Okay.
So
But that will not be discussed today because it's not on the agenda for closed
I
session.
just
today.
wanted to clarify that.
Well, But I think that's the decision of the council.
It is council
Thank you.
decision, but I just,
Thank
you asked about
Yeah, okay.
collaborative communication, so.
May I speak? I just wanted to speak to that point for just a moment. I think that most of the commissioners, if not all, feel that this issue is such a important and hot button issue that not having an immediate voice on council by having somebody on the commission is truly a problem for us. It's, you know, if we don't have somebody there who can constantly sort of align us with where council is and what council is thinking at each meeting, I think we have a feeling that we start being like, you know, the hamster treading on the treadmill and going around in circles and doing work that doesn't need to be done because we're in the wrong place. So I think that is the reason why many of us very much hope that the council will maintain a representative, I mean, that the commission will, most of us hope, I just came back from Tel Aviv at 1 a.m., so forgive me. Most of us hope that the council will retain a member of council on the Gun Violence Prevention Commission.
Can I add to that, if I could? If you make a change like this over here, and then I'm just talking about process over here, is that adoption of a councilman not being on a commission would be to any commission or to just to this particular commission? Like any commission that comes up, a council representative cannot serve on a commission, or is that just specific to the Gun Violence Commission? Because then that would go across the board, you know, of fairness, or it becomes selective. Let's put that in.
Let me speak to that. Really, we've moved some council members off of commissions and boards and committees. We try not to have that. So, yeah, it's not just this commission.
Oh, no, that's what I'm saying. I know we move people on, which means at some point, some people were on, and then that will have a future possibility of being on. Or you make a policy, a hard policy, that commissions as they are formed, created, will exclude commissioners, exclude council members by default.
I think it puts them in a precarious position. I think that's what we're reviewing now. And as a council, we need to discuss that a little more, to talk about it. And I understand the positions that are made, but we need to look at that because, again, we've talked about as a group to a degree, when we make these decisions in the back room about where we put council members, because it could really become a big issue, a conflict issue, and I won't go too much into that today, but it could be. So I think that's a decision we have to make, and we'll consider Rabbi, what you said, well, that'll be considered.
You know, I think to Mr. Major's point, just, and I don't have the list in my head completely, but there are definitely other commissions and boards that the council has council
Yes.
representation
Yes.
on. Youth Services Advisory Board is one that comes immediately to mind where there are council appointments too. There are others as well.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying, because when people sit down and we say there's a conflict of interest, that interest can be varied, and you don't ever know how someone will benefit at any particular point. Because outside of across-the-board policy, then you enter even a more precarious where the choice to either add or subtract a council member would then become, let's just say, more subjective over there.
I'd like to make two clarifying points, just because you used the term conflict of interest, and to be careful, because those are very specific things. As I understand.
I'm repeating what the mayor said.
Of
He
course.
used the words conflict of interest.
To my understanding, at least from the view of policies, to have a council member on a subcommittee, there is no legal conflict of interest, as long as the proper structures are in place. So I don't believe that that particularly applies, but as it relates to boards and commissions wholly, as Commissioner Cohen mentioned earlier, I mean, I know of other boards and commissions whose work is all incredibly important, but not focused so precisely on this area that's necessary in our city right now. And a lot of those boards express frustrations over having their recommendations either be heard or make it fully to council for action. And I think it's important that, especially this commission, have a direct conduit, regardless of who it is, because the actions that we're taking don't just relate to the people that are at this table. It'll be whoever is on council in the future to have a member there, and whatever commissioners are there to have a member there in order to report directly on what's occurring.
And Mayor, just for clarification and history, I'll put on my clerk hat for a moment. During the time I was, during the time I was in the city clerk's office, right before becoming clerk, I was deputy, council had requested that the clerk, as well as one of the council members and the city attorney at that time, review all the authorities, boards, commissions, and committees, especially the permanent bodies, because council was serving as a member representation on perhaps majority of them. And they removed themselves because they said it took up more time than necessary for them to have to attend, with having to do other duties that they were called upon to do, as well as hold their jobs. So that in turn removed them from serving on those bodies. And what we're starting to do again is pick that back up, where at that council, they had taken themselves off and have even reduced the membership, such as on the audit committee. All members of council used to serve on the audit committee. They broadened that one down to a membership of 3. So I just bring that as a history to say where that came from at one time. And I believe, unless I stand corrected as always, that the Youth Services Citizen Board does have a council representative. And that was when they reinstituted it with council member Anita Price, because she wanted to be part of that. And council did allow it, just as I serve as the liaison to the Housing Authority, because they took that away, but felt that at the point in time that needed to come back. So that's where that history comes in with council representation.
Mr. Chair, thank you. I was just going to add that, you know, when I served on the Equity and Empowerment Advisory Board, I thought it was good for you know, to initially get it set up and in its inception. But as the board progressed, I think my presence did not help in many ways. It actually impeded, because they were not open to those conversations that they really wanted to have, because I felt myself in the middle, being on council on one side, and then being a member of the commission, on the board on the other side, and found myself in the middle. And I think based on the conversation with council and the city manager, we decided that it was best for me to be removed from that particular board. So that's one instance. So I think it depends on the board, what your function is, and how it operates, because I really felt like they would have better conversations had I not been in that room. And I think that is true. And Commissioner Cohen is saying, yeah.
Well, I didn't mean it that way.
She was shaking her head like this.
You did an amazing job there against yourself, but it did, I know, become a personal conflict.
It did because of some of my positions on council and some of the things that we decided to do, some of the votes, and so it did. And so I think, and it was not a personal decision, it was a decision made by this council in conjunction with the city manager. And so I think there are times when we need to take a look at that role. That was my only point. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I can just make one additional clarification maybe, just so, and this has nothing to do with what we're just talking about. It actually had to do with you mentioning the ARPA funds, and I do want to make a distinction here in that, so if the council recalls a year plus ago, we discussed kind of that next phase of ARPA funding and where those dollars would go, and there was consensus from the council to proceed in that direction. One of those was a certain allocation that went to the Gun Violence Prevention Commission for this type of work. Similarly, there were allocations that went to the Economic Development Authority, that went to the Arts Commission, Human Service Advisory Board, and in almost all of those cases, those dollars have been awarded and spent with it as well. I just want to make a clarification that none of those dollars, because the council acted on the original allocation, none of those individual awards that went to those arts groups or those social service agencies or others came back to council for approval. So I guess I raised that just to kind of ask a question, which is, much as we just talked about grants that we would receive from the Attorney General, from DCGS, and so on, those coming back, if there's an idea to award to a sub-grantee in those, is the expectation that those previously approved ARPA dollars that were awarded to the Gun Violence Prevention Commission for grants, is there an expectation that those subsequent recommendations will be coming back to the council? I guess is my question.
So to follow up with that, if they don't come back, is there a way that we would get that information through reporting?
Sure,
or
so
is
we
it-
report out what those awards were. Obviously, there's a contract for each one of those, so we certainly have those and have presented those as well. And that, again, that's true whether it's the EDA awarding for businesses that received those funds or the Arts Commission that awarded to different arts groups and agencies and stuff. So yes, that's the way we have approached it through all of those other awards. Again, those dollars are all spent already, but there are funds remaining from the ARPA program that was dedicated to work of the Gun Violence Prevention Commission. And I just asked that for clarification because that is an area where it's not consistent with how that has been handled with the Arts Commission or the Human Service Advisory Board.
So I do recall seeing it through the EDA because we get that report showing where they've been allocated, but I don't recall seeing it with any of the others, so I'm just wondering, is that done, or is that something we should be doing, as opposed to bringing back every single recommendation to the council?
Yeah, and what made that even more challenging is that was an open application period, so what would happen is those groups would make application. If they met the requirements, then they would be funded and move through. There wasn't a period where we would collect all of those applications, have those groups meet and decide whether they were valid, and then proceed forward. So yeah, it was a months-long process that went through it. So, and the reason I'm asking is whether that process is what you would expect. And it goes back to Vice Mayor's point, which is because that under that scenario, the Gun Violence Prevention Commission could continue awarding those grants as they have been along, or is the expectation that they collect all of those, make a recommendation, bring those to the council, and then make those awards, which is different than how those others were addressed. And we can do either way. It's just different than when we receive funding from the Attorney General or from DCJS, because again, you all have already approved those dollars to go toward this effort. But I just looking for some clarification because I don't want to set expectations that then aren't met as we move forward.
Well, Chairman, we probably need to move on. There's some things that we pretty much set.
I just have a couple of things, if I may. I know we're on time. Based on what Bob said, and it has been recognized that this is a hot topic, I think that would preclude the council perhaps to look at that, to see what is going out, because we are questioned in the community on what is being presented. So I think in that case, it's a little different than what goes to the EDA or to the Arts Commission.
And
Yeah.
certainly we're fine.
Yeah.
I'm fine with managing whichever one of those.
I understand what you're saying. You're just looking for guidance and instruction on that, I know.
Yeah, and I want to be conscientious of time, but I would argue that If we do that, I understand that from a reporting standpoint, and I think that's really helpful. I think we need to remember equity in terms of all of this, in terms of reporting, and not just pick out one because it's a particular hot topic issue.
Well, I was going to recommend, maybe not necessarily for the dollars that are under current consideration, but because the commission just adopted this new policy, but that be considered for future funds
Exactly.
going forward, separate from the funds that are already being discussed right now. And back to the discussion on serving of boards and commissions, just that, just broadly, I wish council would be able to serve on more. I do think that even in getting the grant funds, having a particular member of council there in the application helps receive those, because those people who are distributing them can see that they already have one vote on council for this is what it's going to move forward with. Sometimes there's some small changes to it, but I think the consideration of especially big dollars, having a member of council there is incredibly important. And just a point of clarification earlier about the audit committee, it has been reduced to 3 members, but it says at least 3 members. So there's still an opportunity for all 7 members to serve.
Okay, so in light of time, and I really appreciate this, is very helpful. I just want to highlight some things in some of these recommendations because they don't really require action from council. I've already started conversations with the city manager. Right now we have funding through grants and ARPA funding to really go through the next year, but beyond that, we're in the process of looking at additional funding sources. We have not had any funding in the general budget for 2 years. We had some initial funding. So I just wanted council to be aware of that, but we will continue to look for and apply for state and federal funding as it comes available. And as we're hearing from a lot of different sources, there is a lot of money available right now for gun violence prevention and intervention and response. So that's why it's so important when you hear about something to let us know. On recommendation 4, there are a couple of things that would be helpful for council for us to consider, because this goes into the number of people on the commission. We have worked really hard to center youth voices and to get their experiences. Some of our grantees have worked very hard to make sure that we're consistently hearing the voices of youth. So we have talked about establishing an adult community advisory board and a youth advisory board to work directly with the commission. We haven't talked any further about how many people that would be or what the application process would look like. And we also want to work more closely with the Youth Services Citizens Board, because we think there are some collaborative things that we can do to continue to engage those youth voices. So I wanted to make you aware of that. We also want to work very hard to do a better job of connecting with local businesses and corporations, not only from a funding aspect, but from a community-wide support aspect. Recommendation 5, we'll be hearing about a public awareness campaign this afternoon. Recommendation 6, as we build out this work and these recommendations, we're likely to create some new ad hoc committees, and so we would welcome your support for that internal infrastructure. Recommendation 7 is actually to consider adding a youth and a young adult representative to the commission. Again, that would be council's role, and council would set the parameters for that. But again, as a way to center the experiences of youth and young adults, we feel like that voice is really important, and we don't hear it regularly other than through the engagement that we create through some of these opportunities with our partners. The last one is, Peter?
I have one question about it says that there would be non-voting members of the.
That's up to council.
Yeah.
That's just something we talked about in the strategic session, where I think I'm certainly fine either way. So.
Mr. Chair, and I'll be real quick, on the recommendation for adding a youth advisory Board and Adult Community Advisory Board, it's so challenging to staff these boards. So I'm wondering if there's already one existing that we could charge with this piece of the Gun Violence Task Force to come back or to work on it with one of the existing boards. And I don't know exactly what that would be off the top of my head, but I'm thinking run through them and see if there's one in particular or some.
Well, I think the Youth Services Citizens Board is a great example. We could just collaborate with them
With that
because of their
particular
youth
one.
representation.
And then on the one for the youth, maybe there's another board that might be able to do something
could look at
similar.
that.
I'm just saying that we have such a hard time.
Can add too many and it
Yeah.
becomes cumbersome.
It is
Yeah.
already that way and having challenges staffing them.
That is something that I'd like to see just generally with some council policies, that something be referred to a particular board and then maybe go to another board for recommendation and be workshopped before they come back up to council.
That's a great idea.
Or part of the ad hoc or something.
Yeah.
Same thing, yeah.
Well, the last is really probably the most, all of those had to do more with infrastructure. Number 8 is the one where we really, I think, wanted to engage in a longer-term conversation with you all strategically, and not just with council, but with all of our partners. I've suggested to Bob that we, kind of the leaders of each of the pieces of the framework meet more regularly together strategically to understand the data, to understand, what's just happened, how can we respond better, are there some gaps showing up, who's going to be best able to respond to that. And as we've noticed and talked about a lot recently, again, honing in on those root causes, we have been concerned that, our efforts have been citywide, and to a degree that needs to continue. But we're also aware that Northwest Roanoke is disproportionately affected by gun violence in the community. If you just look at the data, it's very clear. And so looking at some of these key areas, blight, workforce development, economic opportunity, affordable housing, education, green spaces, tree canopy to address the Heat Island Index, which has a direct correlation with crime, increased youth activities and opportunities for social connection, and then any legislative or law enforcement strategies. Strategically, I think we have been very interested in looking at how we can direct some critical resources now with urgency into Northwest Roanoke with some very clear metrics that we hope to see results from that are good and measurable, not just pie in the sky or too idealistic, but very realistic. And so we wanted to get some input from council on if that seems to be a good path to take. I don't think, I think any recommendations that we come up with and any plan we would bring back to council for your concurrence and your support, because we need to know as council when people are talking to us, but we want to be clear in our collaboration on this. So I'd just open that up for comments from you all and thoughts that you have.
I have just one comment. Mr. Chair, coming from a sustainability conference, again, the deputy mayor from Montego Bay did exactly what you're just suggesting or recommending, that you deploy the majority of your resources in the area that is impacted, and he said they saw a 22% reduction in crime. So I'm really anxious to talk to Leanne when she gets back. We were both there together on sustainability, but it's amazing what we came out with, especially when it comes to gun violence. But that made a huge difference, because we're trying to cover all of our bases, but he said to zero in, just deploy everything you have into that impacted area, and he said he saw 22% reduction. That's huge.
Let me say, to make sure the public knows this, we haven't been ignoring Northwest.
Oh, no,
I mean, we've
no,
been sending
not at all.
resources there a long period, for a while. We have to continue to do that, but that's no secret to everybody in Northwest. We know that. And our city has been focusing on that. I mean, we go, if you can look Northwest and down the Melrose corridor, in these neighborhoods and these with our gang group, our focus and our money has been going in the Northwest. I know with police and resources, and that's something that we talked about when we were talking to Chicago and their people. They're saying, this is where you gotta go. This is what you need to do. You need to even take money. They even talked about, well, since we're talking about crime and gun violence, they have some people that work for you to be in those, embedded in those communities, to let you know what's going on. We're doing that. We're doing that, and we're gonna continue to do that. And so I want the public to understand that, and it's something that we all, and I say all of us now, all of us, because we've had a bad month. We've had a bad month in this city. And I'm not saying gun violence, I'm saying count all of it because it comes back to us. We've had a bad month. If you look at what happened at downtown, when we talk about our business community getting involved, downtown now. And what frustrates me is the fact that we have almost 10 police officers right in a block of what happened downtown. And there still was shootings doing it. So, you know, I've always been one that don't look at the scoreboard, but if we look at that scoreboard, we're trailing. We're trailing in this, in what we're trying to do. It's not because of the effort is not there. I think we got some great things going on, and especially with our youth, and we can materialize that. We got a lot of the community that are working. And I'm just not saying gun violence, I'm saying council, it comes, we get back, we're hearing that, and we, you know, we've got to keep working. I think there's some good things that we can do, but I just want to make sure that this public knows that we've been going, and myself as an African-American that lives in Northwest, that lives there, we've been pushing things there. We've been pushing that. We're trying to get community. We're bringing people on that live in these areas to try to work with them. Some men that have a history of crime and being involved in crime. So we got to continue. But I'm just saying that we have been working religiously in Northwest and what we're trying to do with our resources and how we're doing that. I mean, it's something some things I kind of question what we're doing, but we do it. We do it, you know, in terms of that, but we do it. So I appreciate that, but when we've tried to do that and we need to continue to do it. So anyway, I just wanted to share that with you. And as we go forward,
I just want to follow up with.
We're gonna have to end. I'm gonna tell the chairman.
And because I think
I want to let Mr. Harvey.
And I'll be real quick. I just want to clarify something with Mr. Mayor. Yes, the impetus for what I said was basically just to say that we have allocated funds throughout the city that have not been 100% all in Northwest. That is true. What I was simply saying is that we were thinking, based on recommendation 8, that we deploy most of the resources in Northwest. So I wasn't suggesting that there was not any funding going there or we should be doing more. I'm just saying that instead of, spreading it out throughout the city in pockets, to maybe refocus specifically on the area that is being impacted. That was my only point I was trying to make.
Part of, Mr. Ray, absolutely. None of this is to say that, none of this is commentary on the past. It is commentary on how we're wanting to move forward, but I appreciate you also making that point clear to the public. I'm totally on board with that. One of the things I've asked for is, can we start to learn the story behind the numbers that we see? And a lot of times, because we're dealing with active crimes, that are having to go through the legal justice system, the criminal justice system, the story isn't fully known yet because you're innocent or presumed guilty and all of that. But it does seem anecdotally that we're seeing a shift in the stories. Now, that's not absolute, but it seemed to be that at one point we were seeing a lot of gang-related, and I think those things are still there. It seems like what we're starting to see now is, I'm angry with one person is angry with another person, and choice number one is to pull out a gun and kill you. Right. That we're certainly seeing that nationwide. We want to be careful making those connections, but paying attention to the stories behind the numbers and shifting our work in those areas has become a pretty critical part for us.
Great point, Tim. I'll come back to you. Great point. But having to be in elected office,
Yes.
people don't seem to be interested. They need to get that. We want to do that. We try to get that out there. But it's just not helping us sell it. I wish we could get the story behind the shootings. I wish people would understand that guys and men and women go to the hospital and they curse the police officers out when they come talking about that. You know, that's more and more. Nobody's helping. We're not telling you anything. But I agree with you. Good point.
And I recognize I have been in positions, I think we all have, where we are the ones that get the angry questions. And so I want to acknowledge that you get those and most of the rest of us don't. Not to compare, but we touched that. I've also found that the people that are willing to listen, we can talk to, will listen to us. I had someone come to me and say, y'all just blaming the guns. Well, this person allowed me to unpack that a little bit and got around to the end of the conversation and came to me after the commission meeting and said, I am so glad I came tonight. You all are doing great work. We're not going to agree on everything, and I think the same works on the other end in the community, the persons who might be disposed to responding in a violent way. To the people who are willing to think, we can reach. Thank you.
Ms. Russell?
Okay, I just have wanted to say, I appreciate all that has been said, but one thing that has not yet been said, and that is we need to give credit where credit is due. The police department, they are out here, they are the boots on the ground, and while I can appreciate what the Gun Violence Commission is doing, I just don't want to leave out what the city itself is doing with regards to patrolling and bringing the criminals in and helping to fight the gun violence. Also, the reset team, the whole of government, the ex-felons working with the youth. I think those changes have been noted also, and I just want to give credit where credit is due. And also where you are talking about your recommendation, this leads into what the administration is doing. When we look at the blight, Bob has brought that before council. We have talked about what code enforcement is doing. We've talked about the workforce development and the opportunities for our youth, affordable housing, as well as the green space. We talked about tree canopies, the youth activities with the youth summit. So I just don't want to leave those things out as where they're coming from as well. It should not just be rooted to address with the council those root causes of gun violence, but yet we're leaving out, for me, and I just wanted to be clear in that, is that the administration is handling these. We're putting money forward. Opera dollars have been placed with the Northwest community, as the mayor and them have said, with the $5 million going into the Gainsborough, with money going into Melrose, where we're working with Goodwill. So there are good things going on that is combating gun violence and trying to improve the neighborhood, especially for the Northwest community. Thank you.
Mr. Ralston?
I'm kind of going to go back to Pastor Harvey's comments. The data shows us a story, and the things we learn at these conferences from Chicago and other places is because they've been using data for a long time. And so I'm really glad to hear about the metrics. I think that's really important to look at. Are we looking at the top of a curve, or are we looking at what's been happening over the last 20, 30 years and how we play into that historical side of things? In this same document you gave us, we had just data from 2020, 2021, and 2022, and 2023, as if, gun violence started then. We need to make sure that we're getting that full picture of more of where we are in that curve and how are we doing in this. Because it's something we can do in every single part of our city government is make more decisions based on the data we're seeing, not just what we're hearing, because we hear a lot of things on city council, but the data may show us something else. So I really applaud you guys for making sure to put those metrics in there. It's a great way.
Just to close, I will also add that, the city does have a plan, and that plan is working well. It has bumps, it has edges. We it's really important that when we have opportunities, we allow those opportunities to be tested and that we not stifle them or close them down before they've had a chance to be successful or at least show us some results. I also want to say that boots on the ground are all of our community partners, all of our nonprofit organizations who every day are building relationships with our youth and their families and doing this hard work. So all of that, with everyone that Ms. Moon Reynolds mentioned, are critical to this. And so I want to thank council and commission. Ms. Rabbi?
So one of the things is that I'm hoping the council will pay attention to the very last recommendation on Recommendation 8. As I mentioned, literally at 1 o'clock in the morning, I arrived back in Roanoke after being both in Poland and in Israel. And what struck me is that both of those countries have common sense gun legislation. It is as difficult to purchase a firearm as it is to get a driver's license. And one of the things that became clear to me is that we sometimes think that the voices that we have on a local setting cannot make a difference on a statewide legislative setting. And I personally would like to encourage council to come up with some type of statement that would go directly to the Virginia legislature as to what Roanoke City would like to see as common sense gun legislation. I understand that a lot of people are going to say that guns are not the problem, people are the problem, or something of that sort. The bottom line is that a person with a gun who wants to hurt somebody is much more dangerous than a person who wants to hurt someone without a gun. So I hope that you all will look at those legislative possibilities and your legislative voice. Thank you.
Yes. Just if I may on that note, the Gun Violence Prevention Commission is one of the advisory boards commissions that will have until June 23rd to submit whatever recommendations they have to the city attorney for the legislative committee to consider for next year. There's no guarantee of anything being considered or even in the same form that it's submitted to us. But so that way you all have an opportunity to discuss it in your own commissions and send it up the ladder.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Yes, suggestions.
Maybe I missed something here, but one thing I don't see in any of the recommendations is parental involvement. Should it be number 8?
It's included, it's already included in a lot of the work that we're doing.
Okay.
In outreach to parents, but it's definitely included in number 8.
Okay.
Yeah. And it could be included in the adult advisory as well to have parents.
Thank you.
And I'm done. I just want to thank you, Mr. Chair, and Vice Mayor, and the rest of the Gun Violence Prevention Commissioners, those who are here and those who are not here. I just want to say thank you for your work, bringing forward these recommendations. They seem well thought out and took a lot of time and energy, and I know you all are volunteers, and I know what it's like to be a volunteer, and I just want to say thank you for your time.
All right, thank you, Vice Mayor. All right, we're gonna go into a quick recess, about 5 minutes, and come back and get into the budget. Well, I think that should be as interesting
I hope somebody brings me some
as we're talking
sandwiches.
about.
Madam Clerk, are we going?